For quite a while now, the statistic that you will find is that in the United States, about 20% have a diagnosable mental health condition at any given time. I want you to just say to yourself, okay, but I don't agree with 20%. I think that's way too high. So let's just go with 10%. Now take a church of 100. Now take a church of 300. Now take a church of 400. Okay, and just go with it. Just go with that for a second. There are people who are dealing with things. There's a person struggling with something.
Got Ted and Ron back for another round of history. Welcome to the both of you.
Well, thanks.
Just a few weeks ago, we kind of laid out the history, or you did rather, of mental health and how it kind of grew into what we understand it today. We were pretty centralized on Central Illinois, but that was kind of a microcosm of something larger happening nationwide. And I've had, since we're recording this now a bit later, I've had the time to reflect and listen to it again. And all of a sudden I was like, I missed that. So I want to start right here. So Dr. Zeller takes the bars off the windows and he uses it instead to cage animals in a zoo on site. Did I catch this right?
Right.
So it wasn't
there's a lot of meaning in that.
Yes. There's a ton of meaning. I was like, how did I miss this? Like, why didn't I get... I mean, that is like, wow. I mean, he was going far beyond... He was making a point and making it strong.
Yeah. Yeah. He saw people.
Right. I think that's
the key.
The bars had to go because they refuted the personhood of the people behind them.
Yep.
We're going to tell a little bit more of the story here, okay? And I think as we left off... And this is where I want to pick up. Ron, you were talking about alcoholism and how that was kind of the first presentation to the elder body in the sense of careful thought and reasoning through what it is that they were seeing in individuals. Here in this podcast, I would like to talk a little bit about the history of the Apostolic Christian Church in terms of their growth and awareness of mental health and how they've grown into that. Obviously, we've got some major ministries that have come out of that understanding, Home for the Handicapped, as it was called in its early days, and ACCFS. And so let's start there. Ron, take us back there. Pick that story up again with alcoholism.
Yeah, so I want to be clear. I didn't live in that time. This is looking back historically, but not much after that. So I think there's a couple pieces. Some of this is conjecture, but I think it's pretty close to accurate. So I think across the board, churches dealt more with alcoholism at the time. Alcoholism stood out. Like, how are these people who are good people, who we've talked to, who've repented, and yet it's still occurring? So I think those questions were the first ones to be asked, and it made alcoholism be the one to stand out there. And it very much lined up with a time in terms of service history where they were being treated differently also. Not everybody agrees with, but this disease model that there's something going on physically and mentally, psychologically, that's making this a problem, and perhaps there's an intervention that could match that. And so I think the church became curious at the same time the rest of society did. And there were, I don't know if there are today, but there were significant parts of the state hospital system which treated alcoholics. There were parts of, like the Elgin, we'll talk about that a little bit later. That's actually where Dick Kilgus began his work, was in the alcoholism unit of the state hospital that was at Elgin.
Okay, I want to seize on something. Okay, you mentioned, as you talked about alcoholism, you were saying, churches, you mentioned churches trying to figure this out, and the medical field trying to figure this out. Those are kind of the two organizations that have been trying to figure this out. The local PTO isn't trying to figure this out. The local Kiwanis is not trying to figure this out, but churches are. Mm-hmm. And I think that actually posits today's conversation very well, because we're going to be talking about the Apostolic Christian Church.
Sure.
I'm fascinated now why churches would be a stakeholder in mental health. Mm-hmm. Do you see my question?
I would conjecture that initially the church's interest wasn't just compassion, that it was, what are we supposed to do with sinful behavior that we don't understand and maybe doesn't follow the usual spiritual model? What do we do? So the church was, I think, in some ways pushed into, we have to look at this in another way.
I think that's really excellent. I think this is really healthy.
Yeah.
Ted?
I think the other thing that comes in here is that there is, for churches, the concept and our belief is that God is close to the suffering, okay, and that God gives grace to overcome. So there's a concept of spiritual power and the concept of a faith community working together, that what you find is, even when you go back to something, whether we're talking about something like dealing with alcohol, the very first treatment options was Alcoholics Anonymous. Came out of a Christian frame. It's not always used that way today, but it came out of a Christian worldview and things of that nature, which is very powerful. But the things that it taught were, you have to tell the truth, you have to turn over your life, you have to be accountable to a community. I mean, there are all these different pieces. You have to turn yourself over to God. You confess, all these things. And so what you find is, though, even with that, you find that you're telling people to come out of the shadows, okay? You don't do it alone, all right? And then you're also finding that then the concept that there's a process of help. It's not something that you turn a light bulb off or on. And so these are all the things going on.
I want to linger with this point because I do think it's somewhat of the concrete that the rest of the conversation rests on. As I trace both of your comments to the question, why are churches stakeholders in this?
Mm-hmm.
And what I'm hearing is that churches take helping people and helping suffering very seriously.
Mm-hmm.
Furthermore, when you're in that work of helping the suffering, you begin to ask some really deep questions.
Sure.
And you find complexity where you were hoping there was simplicity. The church has helped the mental health awareness along.
Oh, sure.
Because of the fundamental principles of what church does for people and the serious responsibility that a pastor takes when he says, I need to help this person. I mean, I think about that, and now we're imagining, to your confession, you weren't there, this presentation of alcoholism to the elder body, that only had to come by invitation of a group of men who wanted to so badly help, but couldn't. There were nuances that their hearts were crying for as they wanted to help people. Do you think I'm far off?
No, I think that's absolutely true. One of the things I look back at that, I think that we don't reflect on, but I think it had to be there. And that is a sense of humility also. You know, this coming to a place of, I can't help alone. We don't have the tools we need. There's something more. And so that willingness to step out and say, come and tell us your thought about that. Come and explain what the current thinking is and what's there. And there may be other interventions which are more effective or that can work with ours. Mm-hmm. So I think without question that's accurate.
And let's let that then be kind of the foundation that we build off here, because I would like to get into this story of our church and its growing understanding of mental health and what it did about it. So Ron, you dropped some names early on. And what were the problems confronting them that led them to where we're at today?
So the names that I don't know would be who in the elder body leadership kind of initiated. I suppose we could find that if we went back and looked. But they had some awareness there were people, even in the church, who were starting to have some exposure and some other ideas. So first two that...
When you say exposure and ideas, you're talking about like at the professional level.
Yes.
Like they're...
For sure.
Okay.
So the two that were asked, one was a physician. And so within that practice, dealing with adults, he would have been exposed to alcoholism. And then Dick Kilgus, who actually worked at, and I don't have the right name, but it was the Elgin State Hospital, which had an alcoholic or alcoholism program there, meaning inpatient, where you went and stayed. And they were not people who came and said, we need to tell you, or you need to know. It was the elder body saying, we want to understand better. Would you come and tell us?
Who is the physician?
The Walt Gosser. Is it Walt?
I think it was Walt Gosser.
Yeah.
Right?
Did I say a different Gosser?
You didn't say a name.
Oh, Yes, and they knew each other and had quite a bit of respect for each other. So it was the elder body saying, we need to ask some questions, which is really encouraging to me. Neither of them were forward people saying, you've got to go there, you have to do this. They came by invitation. And I remember Joe Breaker was asking some questions, Ron, they've taught us that alcoholism is a disease. He would have been from an era who wouldn't have started there. He in that explanation, shared his migration from the sin of drunkenness to the awareness that there is an addictive piece to it. I never had any sense he diminished the sin, but was willing and able to see that there was more needed in terms of intervention. So I think I'm pretty sure they did the first presentation to the elder body, which would have been at alcoholism, and then one, I think, not too much after that, which would have been on schizophrenia. It's kind of exciting to think of what occurred there. I don't know that they were as excited at the time, but
I think I remember Dick talking to the elders also about some things related to marriage stuff at some point. Do you remember that or not? No, I don't.
No, I suspect that it's true. The way he approached spiritual leadership gave the elder body a huge degree of comfort. Mm-hmm. And one of the pieces, which we'll come to later, when he was ready to propose a counseling service, and if you know him and know the depth of his heart, this would have been passionate. And they said, not yet. And his response to that, if they said not yet, then we need to wait. But it was a gift to the church because things didn't get pushed away then. He could work with, gain credibility, and when the time was right, there weren't those things to overcome. There was a readiness to step in and a high degree of trust.
Well, I think that's super neat to talk about. And do we want to go there to that request for an agency, or is there more benchmarks along the journey that you want to?
Well, the next step wasn't that.
Yeah.
The next step was appointing this task force, the mental health. Was it called mental health task force? I'm not sure if I have the term right.
It was. I thought the mental health committee.
I think it was referred to as the mental health committee.
Yeah.
Which was to explore. So there wasn't a specific
assignment. Was that an elder committee?
No. There were, I think there were 2 elders on it.
Can you give me a decade?
So it existed in the 70s, and I came into it in the 80s.
Okay. That's helpful.
Yeah. So I don't have exact years there, although I think we have, there may be some pieces there.
So
but the initial was to explore. So one of the first things that was done, which is I look back and I think, wow, that was a big deal.
Wait a minute. Explore what?
Just mental health in a broad way.
Okay, in a broad way.
So I don't think there was like, what should we do or what's the core of it? It was really just you take it and teach us and find out what's out there. And so
really an expansion. Okay, alcoholism is one thing, schizophrenia is another thing, and we're not so naive to think there's only 2 things on the table. Let's do some investigation.
Was that when they did a survey?
Right. The questionnaire that went out, and I'm sure it didn't go to everybody, but it went to a large number. The response was high, and it was things like, what are you experiencing? So within yourself or your family, questions about addictions or depression, those kinds of things. What kind of services have you sought? Where did you get help with those things?
And this went to who?
It went out to the whole church.
Really?
Yeah. And we could, if we looked, we could probably find the numbers. And I'm sure it had to go through the local church because there would have been no other way to disseminate it. But the response was very broad. There wasn't high resistance to it. Not everybody filled it out because not everybody had an interest. But I remember looking at that data as it came in. So that was a huge awareness piece. So long before maybe we should have an agency or maybe we should have a hotline or those pieces was this data. And the data showed that, there it is, that there are people who need those services and who are accessing those. And I think it showed that while those things were often private, it's there, it's real, it's not unique.
So I think one of the things that you have to do is to remember that at a time when this was not talked about, there was a lot of shame attached to struggling in some way. Out in society, it was a shame in the church. In churches, not just ours. It was just,
right.
But then I want you also to do something. I want you to think about 20%, okay? For quite a while now, the statistic that you will find is that in the United States, that 1 in 5, but 20% have a diagnosable mental health condition at any given time. I want you to just say to yourself, okay, but I don't agree with 20%. I think that's way too high. So let's just go with 10%. All right, let's go with 10%. Okay?
1 in 10.
Now take a church of 100. Now take a church of 300. Now take a church of 400. Okay, and just go with it. Just go with that for a second. There are people who are dealing with things. There's a person struggling with something. Okay,
And
that's real.
And if you are in the role of helping people,
That's right.
you can't ignore this.
You cannot.
No, that's a
ignore
great
that.
point.
You can't ignore that.
So Ron, pick us back up now. This committee, they get feedback. They realize that, yes, it is present and people are actively seeking solutions.
Yep. So two things that happened early on with this committee that I think are very significant in terms of the growth within the church. So the one was established, it was called the Mental Health Hotline. So there were either 5 or 6 sisters. They chose nurses. So it wasn't necessarily about their knowledge about mental health. It was about their medical training that had taught them how to listen and hear what's going on and ask them questions. So the operator, who had nothing to do with our church, would say, Apostolic Christian Hotline, can I help you? The person would share whatever information, and then that would get referred to whichever sister was on duty. So they would get that, and they were expected, I think it was within 24 hours, to call them back and give some information, primarily referrals, not only referrals, but primarily referrals.
And so their duty was really to direct them to the next best step.
So this happened in conjunction with, that was the development of this national referral base, which we still use. It wouldn't resemble it if you looked at it. And it was continually updated. So if there was a situation that happened in Ohio someplace and somebody had used a service and they came up against a situation with a council, like that just doesn't work. They weren't supportive of the church or their advice wasn't biblically based, then they would get pulled from that. Or somebody, and the elders were pretty in tune, I think, as somebody sought service, they think, you know what, I should share that. And so they would let that committee know. So this was an ongoing referral database. That's what the sisters used. So they would just leaf through their database. There was no such thing as doing this on the computer. Just find the right page, look for what was in that area, and give that information to whoever called.
So this call center was the very first service that our church offered.
It was the first service. That's correct.
Our membership.
But the call center and the referral database, while they're not one and the same, neither could exist without the other. Mm-hmm. They were very much a part of the same system.
And then over time, some simple brochures, a lot of brochures and handouts on what is depression, what is anxiety, things of that nature, and they would send out brochures. So
education.
And kind of in conjunction with brochures, just explaining alcoholism or bipolar or any of the things we're currently talking about, was we asked each church to send us a tape of any presentation they had on something mental health related. And so we had Lauren Stoller's on depression, which was used incredibly and was very. And I think Bob Flutter's was maybe on marriage. Not sure I have the base of that.
On marriage. You did one on depression, I remember.
So they just came to us and we would screen those, listen to those presentations to make sure we were comfortable with them. And a set of those tapes went to each church. If I had to guess, maybe about 20 tapes, something like that. And while that sounds very simple in terms of education in the sense of normalizing and encouraging people to get help, it was a huge, as you said, compassionate step forward that it's okay if you have this. There's help out there. We support you in getting help.
With that extension of education, you're really taking it not only to servicing those who are struggling, which the survey highlighted. Now you are educating the church as a whole and those who are not struggling and have no reason to understand it well. But now they are being asked to understand it well, which is now a community expansion, right?
Sure. So somewhere's in there, again, I don't know the timing, there was enough interest in a counseling service. That's when that was presented to the elders.
What was the hope?
It was to establish a counseling center very much like this and have professionals staff it.
I think this is also, too, where you just see, looking back, how you can see God's hand in things that you can't see going forward. The thing about it is, as we're going along, again, remember what we're understanding more in the Apostolic Church. So society is understanding more, other churches are understanding more, things of that nature. Remember how, I don't remember, we were talking, Matt, in our last thing, that there was also to this sense that in the 1800s, or you go back further, all the different kind of things would have been thrown together as a mix, So now, over time, right, then our church actually starts to be able to develop some of those specializations also. So you've got the Home for the Handicapped, now Life Points. Then we have Gateway Woods. There was an understanding of that broken homes and the needs of adults. So you have something like that. You have these different things start to emerge in different places, that there's an understanding of life and different kinds of needs are needed. We had different brothers and sisters going in over time that went into the medical field. We had teachers, and so as it went from more of an agricultural understanding, right, then we started to have people going into medicine at various times, dentists and other things. So all that's emerging. And I think that that's part of the context that this is coming up in, too, that we have to remember was helping to buoy some of this as well.
Yeah, I would add to that also the church's move toward missions. So the idea that we should serve, not just be here to learn, to do right and to teach. Yeah. So the nurse, you mentioned Gateway Woods and Life Points. The nursing homes they were a little bit ahead of that, but within that same time area. And all of that started opening up a thinking of not do we have to do, but what can we do? Mm-hmm. Where are there opportunities to do that? And I suspect some of that also ripened along the way from the first proposal to the second proposal. That would have been the late 90s, but I think Gateway Woods actually was the first kind of to put something together and step in and had the Gateway Family Services here in Illinois. So there was a combining of interests or people on that. So Gateway Woods had some of the staffing on that first. I don't even think it was called a board initially, but exploratory committee, whatever it was.
The actual committee that put the proposal together, Ron Messner and Tim Souter were named as co-chairs. Dick Kilgus, Denny Verkler, Bill Schick. Okay, and so what you had there is you've got Life Points, Mental Health Committee, and Gateway Woods. And then you had Jeff Timms and I as advisory members.
I think it's really helpful because it shows the why. While there were differences of opinion about approach, those pieces, there was broad collaboration in terms of moving forward. They brought tremendous gifts. From that came the proposal that resulted in 2000 us actually starting services. So there was a readiness. And we would say the Lord prepared the way, but the church was ready. Church leadership was ready. At that point, it started happening pretty fast.
Yeah. The other thing, and this does bring up God's hand in so many of the different things with different people at different times, whether you're talking about the various roles of boards and elders, but then also people outside the Apostolic Christian Church that helped us along the way. Also, there were people in professional services that came into contact with apostolic people, developed a love for them, tried to understand and serve them. And so that's been a really important part of that. And the fact that even as I was coming into the field, I was able to have Ron and Dick help mentor me, as an apostolic Christian young guy coming into this field. It's not known as a Christian-friendly field for sure, and to have mentors in that, and I had professional mentors that helped me, and then, and you know what? And then now I get to do that for others.
Well, and just even speaking to that, the partnership might be too strong of a word, or maybe not exactly the right word, but this partnership with non-AC entities has been huge, right?
And I think we should speak into it, whether we use names or not, because we wouldn't be where we are today, both in terms of your training, the internship, ongoing supervision following that, the mentoring and counseling, that supervisory piece, but also just right down to paper. Like forms and processes.
The Christian mental health community was all but willing to partner and help.
Yeah, and when I was coming into the field, I needed to do an internship, and that's when I contacted Dr. Hammond, and he had known Bob Fletter and Joe Breaker, and they had talked, and he was trying to understand and how to serve the Apostolic Church, and that's where, when I was able to do an internship with him, I'll never forget the call that I had to him, as I can remember right where I was when I called him. And And I said, hi, my name's Ted Witzig, and I'm interested in doing an internship. And we were talking, and he said, so what's your faith background or things of that nature? And I said, well, I'm from the Apostolic Christian Church. And he was just dead silence on the phone. And I was like, oh, boy, what's this mean? And anyway, he said, Ted, I have been praying for you for years and years. And he said, I did not know that I would ever get to meet you. And he had been working with apostolic people in the counseling field here in Central Illinois, and he felt like that people would be served well if they had someone from within the church. And he prayed for the Apostolic Christian Church that the church would raise up people to be able to help in that regard. Part of our task was to set up the processes and forms. So we went and asked him about it, and hey, can we purchase your forms that you use and help us? We don't have a business plan, or how do we do this?
With Dr. Hammond.
Yes, with Dr. Hammond. He said, could we purchase your forms? And Dr. Hammond says, no. Just like a no. And it was like, well, this is going to be an awkward lunch. And he said, no, you cannot purchase the forms. But Ted can come in, make any copies, or take anything that is needful that will be helpful to you.
It's humbling.
It's an incredible story.
It's humbling when you hear history like this. You recognize how you are the recipient of work, toil, prayers, faithful men and women for decades.
Yeah.
Right?
No, without question.
I mean, even in this moment, we, three of us in the church, are indebted to God because He orchestrated countless men and women in our church, out of our church, believers.
Yeah. And I think that when you look at that and you think about the things that came together with Mental Health Committee, with Gateway Woods, it was an Apostolic Christian Counseling Services at the time at 2000. And then as it kind of started to grow, between 2000 and 2006, Ron was our administrator, essentially.
And very part-time counselor.
Oh, he was,
because you were full-time at Life Points. What is now Life Points?
One evening. It was Tuesday evenings. I'd see 3 people on Tuesday evenings.
Yeah. And then eventually, as the elder body saw fit to bring together Apostolic Christian Counseling Services and Gateway Woods Family Services, and that working through, in 2006, that's when we became Apostolic Christian Counseling and Family Services. That was where we had the clinical part, but on also that. And
that's why we have the very long acronym. Everybody wants to know.
Everybody wants a shorter name, and that's why we got it. It was that blending of those names.
And it was necessary at the time. It was necessary to show respect and acceptance of the material they had coming in. And so within the church, there were different preferences.
There was a lot of, Matt, for your knowledge, that was when there was a ton of conflict prior to that.
Yeah. Well, and I'm somewhat aware of that. And so let me just insert this, and then I want you both to talk. We're recounting history, and that's important.
Yeah.
We need to know our history. But we also hold our memories with a ton of humility. Recognizing that our process of the history comes from our vantage point and our perspective.
Yep.
So let me say that out at the front, because I do want you to share what you would want to share about that, what is helpful for us to understand about what we learned. Mm-hmm. And then we're going to recognize that our recalling of it is with grace and humility, recognizing that there's more that could be said. And anyway, so yeah, do share a little bit about that. Ted, what did we learn out of that? What were some of the stress points?
It was difficult. I don't mean to call me. It was a difficult time.
So what we realized, just like there's different approaches to just about every other field, there's different approaches to counseling. And then inside of Christianity, there are different approaches to how to do counseling. And as we sorted that out, what you're hearing from Ron and I is kind of the mental health counseling side. And there are other approaches inside of broader Christianity. Approaches range from what we would say is more like the spiritual warfare kind of end of things. And then there's another perspective that is going to be really focused on the focus of Scripture, and which is a beautiful thing to focus on Scripture. But the concept is that inside of counseling, that all that God wants us to do with counseling is contained inside the Word. So with that, we had different opinions about how, and different beliefs really, about how counseling was to be done and how the Scripture was used as the essentially the sole tool, or was viewed as the foundation from which we learned other things out of. And so
one would have been more welcoming to secular learning, for example, or scientific understanding, or the other one may be more resistant. Is that fair to say?
I think it's actually broader. I think that's accurate. But I think this also fits within sovereignty and predetermination. And depending on how you define sovereignty, if that is absolute, no influence, no personal contribution, then everything which has occurred was not just accepted by God, but ordained by Him. And so that's a legitimate range within Christianity. About people fall different places. I think all of Christianity would say God is sovereign, but what we mean by that varies some. There actually was good learning for us.
Yes.
It tempered us
It did.
in where we could be extreme, and still does today. So it's not a bad thing, even though the differences are that great, because you can go, if you could just go happily down the trail that seems comfortable and pleasant to you, you can go further than you should go.
I really appreciate this. It should come as no surprise for anybody who's lived any bit of life that growth comes with growing pains. And even new ideas and vision comes with that. Can you succinctly kind of lay out our platform? You kind of already have, I'm guessing, with biopsychosocial.
Yep.
But if you were to say, this is a little bit about where we have coming out of that, this is our basic principle or axioms that we work under. Is that fair?
Yeah. So I have I have the actual thing that we finally got to. So it would have come through 2006, and so the ACCFS board received this as that they're calling. The elders of the Apostolic Christian Church have discussed the nature of mental illness and how it relates to the soul of man. The elders have been united in their support that based on Scripture and extensive experience, we believe we're complex beings with three overlapping and integrated parts of our being. We are physical, spiritual, and mental beings, and these cannot be separated, but each part can be affected by separate factors, including biological, spiritual, psychological, or social factors. Each needs to be assessed, and any dysfunction needs to be treated or addressed based on the cause or causes of the dysfunction. This may include repentance, prayer, spiritual counseling and teaching, medication, other health interventions, and or psychosocial counseling.
I'm pretty sure that statement specifically was asked to be endorsed by the elder body. So that was a unanimous, yes, we support that statement. So we could go forward with some confidence.
You know, Ted, as you read that understanding of mental health and the human being and what it looks like in the faith setting that the elders, Ron, you mentioned they unanimously supported. It again comes back to where I began and sanctions my point, that the church has a vested interest in mental health. Now, I'm going to ask a question here because I think the case for its beauty has been well laid out. Is there any danger or is there any shadow to a mental health facility that is so united with a church? I'm curious what those are and how that has fed itself into how we operate. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I think it's fair. And I think one of the areas which we've actually talked about in any of our missions. So if a church who's, I don't want to say overemphasized, but deeply bought into missionary work in some country, or our nursing homes, or Life Points, or Gateway Woods, or here, in the same way that some churches got caught up into social gospel, I think that same thing needs to be watched for. The church cannot be defined by its nursing homes. It can't be defined by its mental health services or presentations from us. It still has to be defined by the gospel and salvation. And as people seek help, as we get excited about, as we need to be careful, that is not the mission of the church. The mission of the church is saving of souls. And I think any area, no matter what, if it was a soup kitchen, it could take on that flavor because it's more hands-on and identifiable, those pieces. So I don't see it as a shadow, and I don't sense something going wrong with that. But I think that is important that
but if we are
all
going
understand that.
If we're going to steward this mission, we have to be aware of that. We can't be blind to that.
Correct.
Sure.
I would totally agree.
We believe that our job is to support the functioning of the church. Okay, we are not a church, but the concept that's really important. We're not a church. I mean, this agency is not the church. We're here to support the marriages and the families and the functioning, so that the church does what it needs to do.
I think that's beautiful and really, really important. Ted, let me ask you this question, and I'm wondering if there is, again, if to a hammer everything's a nail.
Sure.
Do you think that there is necessary checkpoints, for example, or do you think you could possibly fall into the standpoint of seeing everything as a mental health matter when it is not? And is there a cautionary around that as you steward your own profession?
It's a good question. I think there's always the need for checks and balances. There's no question about that, and that's true. I think what it does is that is the part of the balancing. And you know, there's going to be people. There are people who have questions or ask for cautions on things, and I think that we have to continually be able to look at ourselves and look at the things and go back. Are we true to our missions? And that's where there's a safety here also. Ron and I here are employees, okay? We have an administrator, Tim. We have a board of directors that sits over us, you know, and then we have the elder body. So, but we're not free agents in that sense. I mean, we don't feel micromanaged by that. But I would just say that we're not Lone Rangers.
Thanks, Ted and Ron, for this careful accounting of the history of mental health and the Apostolic Christian Church and this entity, Apostolic Christian Counseling and Family Services. It's good to understand the past so we understand better who we are. And even as I heard that, I heard an honest accounting of who we are and who we are not, and how this agency fits into a larger effort, and that is the local church and the denominational church, and equipping and supporting the care for people. Thanks, each one, for coming on, listening. I hope that this has been helpful to you. God bless you, each one.